The Xanthari war fleet appeared at the edge of human space like a swarm of metal locusts. 300 warships emerged from the darkness between stars, their hulls gleaming with the cold light of distant suns. Commander Veckrel stood on the bridge of the flagship and watched the scanning reports flow across his screens. The third planet from this yellow star would be perfect for the collective. Rich in resources, covered in water, and inhabited by a species that had barely begun to explore their own solar system. This would be an easy conquest, the 47th world to fall before Xanthari might. Admiral Jake Kane sat in his command chair aboard the Earth defense ship Defiant and studied the same data from the other side. He was 62 years old with more gray hair than black and eyes that had seen too many battles. The numbers on his screen made his stomach tight. 300 enemy ships against humanity's 400 vessels. It should have been a fair fight, but the Xanthari had been conquering worlds for decades. Their weapons were tested and proven. Their tactics were refined through countless victories. Humanity had never fought a real space war before today. Lieutenant Sophie Martinez looked up from her tactical station with fear barely hidden behind her professional mask. She was young, barely 25, and this was supposed to be a routine patrol assignment. Now she was staring at an alien invasion force that could wipe out human civilization in a matter of hours. Her hands shook slightly as she worked her console, trying to get more detailed scans of the enemy formation. Kane took a deep breath and made his decision. He had hoped this day would never come, but he had prepared for it anyway. Every admiral in the Defense Force knew about Protocol 13. Most of them thought it was insane. Some thought it was necessary. All of them hoped they would never have to use it. He turned to his communications officer. The young man looked back at him with wide eyes, waiting for orders that would determine the fate of billions of people. Kane kept his voice steady and calm, the way he always did in a crisis. He had learned long ago that panic spread faster than fire in space, and a captain's fear could kill his crew faster than any enemy weapon. "Open a channel to the enemy flagship," Kane said. "All frequencies. Make sure they can hear every word." The channel opened with a crackle of static. On the main view screen, Commander Veckrel's alien face appeared. He looked almost insect-like to human eyes, with mandibles that clicked when he spoke and compound eyes that seemed to stare in multiple directions at once. The translation software turned his chittering sounds into flat, emotionless words. Kane looked directly into those alien eyes and spoke clearly. "I am Admiral Jake Kane of the United Earth Defense Force. You have entered human space without permission. You are ordered to stop your advance and leave immediately. This is your only warning." Veckrel's mandibles spread wide in what his species considered a smile. The gesture looked predatory and cruel. His response came quickly, delivered with the confidence of someone who had given the same speech 46 times before. "Inferior species, your world belongs to the Xanthari Collective now. Surrender your ships and prepare for occupation. If you resist, we will destroy everything you have built and everyone you love." Kane leaned forward in his chair. His voice dropped lower, harder, carrying a weight that made even his own crew shift nervously. "Commander, you are making a terrible mistake. Human history is written in the blood of those who underestimated us. We have fought and survived against impossible odds for thousands of years. We have turned our own planet into a weapon when necessary. We have created technologies that terrify us, then use them anyway because survival matters more than fear. Turn back now while you still can." Veckrel's laughter came through the speakers like breaking glass. "Your threats mean nothing, human. We have conquered 46 worlds. Your fate is already decided. You will bow or you will die." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving Kane staring at a blank screen. For a long moment, nobody on the bridge spoke. They all knew what came next. They had all been briefed on Protocol 13, though most of them had dismissed it as an elaborate bluff. Now they were about to learn the truth. Kane turned to Captain Nicole Brooks, his second in command. She was 40 years old, a veteran of the Mars colony wars and one of the few officers who understood exactly what Protocol 13 could do. Her face was pale but determined. She nodded once, answering the question he had not yet asked. "Activate Protocol 13, Kane said quietly. "Send the recall signal to every ship, every station, every habitat in the solar system. Get our people out of the combat zone. And someone contact President Howard. She needs to authorize this before we go any further." Sophie Martinez felt ice water pour down her spine. She had heard rumors about Protocol 13 during her academy training. whispered stories in late-night conversations between cadets who thought they knew secret things. Most people assumed it was propaganda, a ghost story designed to make potential enemies think twice about attacking Earth. The idea that it might actually exist, that humanity might actually have built such a weapon, seemed impossible. But the orders going out across the fleet were real. Mining stations in the asteroid belt began emergency shutdowns. The 2 million colonists on Mars received evacuation orders. Research bases on Jupiter's moons went dark as their personnel scrambled for transport ships. Every civilian vessel in the solar system turned toward the outer planets, racing to get beyond the orbit of Neptune before the shooting started. In the Pentagon's underground command center, President Linda Howard stood before a wall of screens showing the approaching alien fleet. She was 58 years old, the first woman to hold her office, and she had spent every day of her presidency hoping she would never face this decision. General Peter Carson stood beside her, his uniform crisp despite the late hour and the stress that made his jaw tight. "Madam President," Carson said, "Admiral Kane is requesting authorization for Protocol 13. Howard closed her eyes. She thought about her 2 daughters, both grown now with children of their own. She thought about the 8 billion people on Earth who had no idea their world was about to change forever. She thought about what Protocol 13 would do, not just to the enemy, but to humanity's soul. Some weapons changed you just by existing. Some choices marked you forever." She opened her eyes and looked at the general. "How long until the Xanthari reach Earth?" 72 hours at current speed, Carson replied. "And if we activate Protocol 13, how long do we need?" 48 hours for full deployment. After that, another 12 hours to reach maximum effectiveness. Howard nodded slowly. She looked at the red dots on the tactical display, each one representing a Xanthari warship, carrying thousands of alien soldiers who were just following orders from their commanders. They probably had families, too. They probably thought they were doing the right thing, expanding their civilization and bringing their culture to new worlds. In another universe, maybe humans would have done the same thing. But this was her universe, her species, her responsibility. And she would not let Earth fall. "Authorization granted," Howard said. Her voice did not shake. "Implement Protocol 13. Make sure every human being is evacuated from the inner solar system first. I will not have civilian casualties from our own weapon." "Yes, Madam President," Carson replied. The orders went out instantly, transmitted across military channels with the highest priority codes. Throughout human space, officers who had trained for this moment began executing their predetermined assignments. Ships moved to specific coordinates. Orbital platforms adjusted their positions. On Earth's surface and scattered throughout the inner planets, hundreds of concealed devices powered up for the first time since their installation. Commander Vekral watched his tactical display and saw the human fleet falling back toward their homeworld. He clicked his mandibles in satisfaction. The humans were retreating, clustering around their planet like frightened children hiding behind their mother. It was a typical response from inferior species. They always thought their homeworld would protect them somehow, as if dirt and water could stop plasma cannons and kinetic bombardment. "Navigation. How long until we reach firing range?" Vekral asked. 68 standard cycles. "Commander, excellent. Prepare the assault forces. I want troops ready to deploy the moment we establish orbital control." The Xanthari fleet continued forward at maximum sustainable speed, confident in their overwhelming numbers and superior technology. They had done this 46 times before. They knew how this story ended. The humans would fight bravely, maybe even inflict some casualties, but ultimately they would lose. The strong always defeated the weak. That was the natural order of things. But Commander Vekral had never encountered a species that could turn their own star into a weapon. He had never faced an enemy willing to risk everything on a single desperate gamble. He had never understood that sometimes the most dangerous opponent is not the strongest or the fastest, but the one with nothing left to lose and everything worth protecting. The Xanthari fleet crossed the orbit of Neptune and continued inward, unaware that they were sailing directly into a trap, built on a scale they could barely imagine. The evacuation of the inner solar system was the largest organized movement of human beings in history. Transport ships designed to carry a few hundred passengers were packed with thousands. Cargo vessels that normally hauled ore and construction materials now carried families clutching emergency supply packs. Every spacecraft capable of faster-than-light travel was pressed into service. ferrying people away from Earth, Mars, and the orbital habitats toward the relative safety of the outer planets. Sophie Martinez stood at the observation window of VO, the Defiant, and watched the streams of ships departing from Earth. The planet below looked so peaceful from orbit, blue and white and beautiful, completely unaware of the storm approaching. She had been born on the moon, in one of the low-gravity medical facilities designed for difficult pregnancies. Her mother had returned to Earth when Sophie was 3, but she still remembered the view of home from space. It had always made her feel small but connected, one tiny person in a vast web of humanity stretching across the solar system. Now that web was tearing itself apart to survive. Captain Nicole Brooks joined her at the window. The older woman said nothing at first, just stood beside Sophie and watched the evacuation continue. Finally, she spoke quietly. "First time watching the world end?" Sophie glanced at her. The captain's face was calm, but there was something old and tired in her eyes. "This is not the end," Sophie said, trying to convince herself as much as Brooks. "Protocol 13 is designed to be survivable. Earth will still be here when this is over." Brooks nodded. "That is the theory. But theories and reality do not always match, especially when you are dealing with weapons that can reshape solar systems. I was part of the testing team that ran the simulations. We ran thousands of scenarios trying to predict every possible outcome. You know what we learned?" Sophie shook her head. "We learned that we have no idea what will actually happen when we turn on all those gravitational nodes at once. The math says it should work. The small-scale tests were successful, but this will be the first time we activate the full network. We are guessing, Lieutenant." Educated guessing, but still guessing. Sophie felt her stomach drop. "Then why are we doing this? Because the alternative is worse," Brooks said simply. "The Zenthari will not stop with Earth. Once they have our homeworld, they will move on to Mars, then the belt colonies, then the outer settlements. They will hunt down every human in the galaxy until we are extinct or enslaved. Protocol 13 might be a desperate gamble, but it is the only gamble we have." The two women stood in silence for a moment. Then Brooks put a hand on Sophie's shoulder. "Get some rest, Lieutenant. We have 12 hours before the Zenthari enter effective weapons range. After that, things are going to get very intense very quickly." On Mars, Colony Director Paul Henderson supervised the shutdown of the terraforming reactors that had been running continuously for 40 years. The great machines that pumped heat and oxygen into the Martian atmosphere fell silent one by one, their work abandoned in the face of the approaching threat. Around him, engineers scrambled to secure critical systems and download decades of research data onto portable drives. Henderson had spent 20 years on Mars, watching it slowly transform from a barren wasteland into something that might someday support human life without domes and pressure suits. The ice caps were shrinking as planned. The atmosphere was thickening. In another 50 years, maybe less, people would be able to walk on the surface with just an oxygen mask. It was the dream that had driven him through 2 decades of grueling work in one of the harshest environments humans had ever tried to colonize. Now he was abandoning it all. "Sir, all personnel are accounted for," his aide reported. "We are the last ones left." Henderson nodded and took one last look at the control room that had been his second home. The screens still showed data feeds from thousands of sensors across the planet, monitoring temperature gradients and atmospheric composition and soil chemistry. Those sensors would keep running on automatic for a while, faithfully recording data that nobody would be alive to read if Protocol 13 failed. "Shut it down," Henderson said quietly. "Everything except emergency power. We will be back soon." He did not believe his own words, and judging from his aide's expression, neither did anyone else. The transport lifted off from Mars 30 minutes later, joining the river of ships fleeing toward the outer system. Henderson watched through the viewport as the red planet fell away behind them. He wondered if he would ever see it again. He wondered if anyone would. Aboard the Zenthari flagship, Commander Vekral reviewed the final approach vectors with his senior officers. The human fleet had taken up defensive positions around their homeworld, exactly as predicted. Standard defensive formation, nothing creative or unexpected. Vekral almost felt disappointed. He had hoped these humans might show some tactical innovation, something to make the conquest at least interesting. Analysis, he said to his tactical officer. What are our projected casualties? Minimal, Commander. Human weapons technology is inferior to ours by several generations. Even with numerical parity, our shields should absorb most of their firepower. Estimated losses are between 15 and 20 vessels, primarily lighter craft that may be caught by lucky shots. And ground forces? Ready to deploy. We can have the first wave on the surface within hours of establishing orbital control. Resistance will likely be fierce initially, but should collapse once the humans realize their situation is hopeless. Veckrell clicked his mandibles in satisfaction. He would have this world catalogued and occupied before the Collective Council finished reviewing his initial report. Perhaps they would finally promote him to the high command. 47 conquered worlds should be enough to earn that honor. He had no idea that in 12 hours he would be ordering his fleet to run for their lives. On Earth, in the hidden command bunker beneath the Rocky Mountains, President Howard stood before the activation console for Protocol 13. It looked absurdly simple for something so powerful. Just a single red button protected by a clear plastic cover. No dramatic countdown timers or elaborate security procedures. Just one button that would change everything. General Carson stood beside her, reviewing the final status reports. All gravitational nodes are online and synchronized. Evacuation is 98% complete. The remaining 2% are military volunteers who insisted on staying at their posts. Howard felt a wave of pride mixed with grief. Volunteers. Of course there would be volunteers. Brave idiots who could not bear to run, even when running was the smart thing to do. She made a mental note to personally decorate every single one of them if they survived. Weapon status, she asked. All systems show green. We can activate on your order. Howard took a deep breath. She thought about calling her daughters one last time, but decided against it. What could she say that would make this better? How could she explain that she was about to potentially destroy the solar system to save it? She placed her hand on the plastic cover. Then may God forgive us for what we are about to do. She lifted the cover and pressed the button. For several seconds, nothing seemed to happen. Then, throughout the inner solar system, hundreds of devices that had been hidden for years came to life. They were scattered across every planet, moon, and major asteroid within the orbit of Mars. Individually, each device was relatively simple: a modified fusion reactor coupled with a gravity manipulation field and exotic matter containment. Together, they formed a network that could bend the laws of physics across millions of kilometers of space. Protocol 13 was active. The Xanthari sensors detected the energy spike immediately. Every screen on Veckral's bridge lit up with warning alerts. Energy readings were climbing to impossible levels throughout the human's inner system. Gravitational anomalies were appearing everywhere at once, hundreds of them, all pulsing in perfect synchronization. What is that? Veckrel demanded. Report. His science officer's voice was high with panic. Commander, massive gravitational distortions throughout the system. The energy signature is unlike anything in our database. Whatever the humans are doing, it is operating on a scale we have never seen before. Can it threaten our fleet? Unknown, Commander. The distortions are still building. If they continue to increase at this rate, they could affect local spacetime in unpredictable ways. Veckrel stared at his screens, watching the human star system transform into something alien and dangerous. He had studied the tactical records of 46 previous conquests. Not once had any species demonstrated this kind of capability. Not once had an enemy weapon system triggered this many simultaneous alerts across his fleet's sensors. For the first time since entering human space, Commander Veckrel felt something he had not experienced in decades of conquest. He felt afraid. Admiral Kane watched his own displays with grim satisfaction. Protocol 13 was performing exactly as designed. The gravitational nodes were linking together, forming a web of distorted spacetime that would soon turn the sun itself into humanity's shield and sword. All ships, he broadcast across the fleet channel, brace for gravitational turbulence. This is going to be rough. Sophie Martinez gripped her console as the Defiant began to shake. Through the viewports, space itself seemed to ripple and bend, like looking through water disturbed by falling stones. The effect was beautiful and terrible. The gravitational network reached full power 18 minutes after activation. The effect was immediate and devastating. Throughout the inner solar system, space itself began to flow like water, currents of distorted gravity pulling in directions that should not exist. The sun's natural gravitational field, which normally pulled everything toward its burning mass in predictable patterns, became something far more complex and dangerous under Protocol 13's influence. Commander Vekral felt his flagship shudder as the gravitational currents caught it. At first it was subtle, just a gentle pull that his navigation systems could compensate for easily. Then the pull grew stronger and stronger. Within minutes, every ship in his fleet was fighting against invisible forces that seemed determined to drag them off course. Emergency thrust, Vekral ordered. All vessels maintain formation. The Xanthari warships fired their engines at maximum power, trying to hold their positions against the artificial gravity currents. For a few minutes it seemed to work. Then the currents shifted, pulsing in waves that matched the rhythm of the hundreds of gravitational nodes scattered throughout human space. Each pulse added to the last, building on itself, creating forces that grew exponentially stronger with each passing second. "Commander, we are losing helm control," the navigation officer reported. His voice was steady, but Vekral could hear the fear underneath. "The gravitational forces are overriding our thrust capability." Vekral stared at his tactical display in disbelief. His fleet, which moments ago had been advancing in perfect military formation toward the human homeworld, was coming apart. Ships that should have been holding precise distances from each other were drifting slowly out of position. Some were being pulled faster toward the sun. Others were being flung outward toward the edge of the system. The carefully planned assault formation was disintegrating before his eyes. "Full power to all engines," Vekral ordered. "Coordinate thrust vectors across the entire fleet. We push through this together." But even as he gave the orders, he knew they would not be enough. The humans had not built a conventional weapon. They had turned the solar system itself into a trap, using the sun's own massive gravity as the teeth that would tear his fleet apart. On the Defiant, Admiral Kane opened a communication channel to the Xanthari flagship. His face appeared on Vekral's main view screen, weathered and grim but carrying no triumph or cruelty. When he spoke, his voice was that of a teacher explaining a difficult lesson to a stubborn student. "Commander Vekral, this is Admiral Kane. You are experiencing the full effects of Protocol 13, a gravitational manipulation system that operates on a stellar scale. In approximately 14 minutes, your fleet will reach a point of no return. After that, no amount of engine thrust will be sufficient to escape the pull toward our sun. You have two options. Order your fleet to retreat immediately while escape is still possible, or continue toward Earth and watch your ships burn." Vekral's mandibles clicked in fury. "You dare threaten the Xanthari collective? Your primitive tricks cannot stop us. We will destroy your world and everyone on it." "I am not threatening you," Kane replied calmly. "I am explaining physics. Look at your sensors, Commander. Look at what is happening to your fleet. We have given you every warning, every chance to turn back peacefully. You chose to ignore those warnings. Now you are learning the consequences." The transmission ended, leaving Vekral staring at his displays. His science officer was frantically running calculations, trying to determine if there was any way to break free of the gravitational currents. The results were not encouraging. "Commander," the science officer said quietly, "the humans are telling the truth. We have 13 minutes and 40 seconds before we reach the point where our engines will no longer be able to overcome the gravitational pull. After that, we will be drawn into their star no matter what we do." Vekral felt something cold settle in his chest. "Can we destroy their gravitational nodes? Disrupt the network somehow? There are hundreds of nodes scattered throughout the inner system. Even if we could target them all, which we cannot, destroying them now would likely cause a catastrophic collapse of the network. The resulting gravitational shockwave could tear our fleet apart instantly. So we have no options?" The science officer hesitated, then spoke the words that no Xanthari warrior wanted to hear. "We can retreat, Commander. If we turn back now and burn at maximum thrust, we can escape the gravitational trap. Most of our fleet will survive, most," Vekral repeated bitterly. "How many will we lose? Ships on the inner edge of our formation may be too deep in the gravity well already. Estimate 20 to 30 vessels will be unable to escape even with full reverse thrust." Vekral closed his eyes. 30 ships, 3,000 warriors. 3,000 families who would never see their loved ones again. 3,000 lives that he had led into this death trap because he had been too arrogant to take the human warning seriously. He thought about the collective council and what they would say when he returned, with only 270 ships instead of 300. He thought about his career, his reputation, everything he had built over decades of successful conquests. All of it would be destroyed by this single failure, but that was better than losing everything. "Open a channel to the human flagship," Veckrel said quietly. Kane's face appeared again on the screen. "Commander Veckrel, have you made your decision? What assurances can you give if we withdraw?" Veckrel asked, hating every word. "None," Kane replied bluntly. "You invaded our space. You threatened our world. You ignored our warnings. But if you order your fleet to retreat now, we will deactivate Protocol 13 once you are clear of the danger zone. Your surviving ships will be free to leave. That is the only offer you will get, and if we continue, then in 12 minutes you will cross the point of no return. 6 hours after that, your ships will be pulled into the sun's corona. The heat will destroy your vessels long before they reach the solar surface. There will be no survivors, no rescue, no last-minute miracle. Just death, Commander. Pointless, avoidable death for 300 ships worth of warriors who are following your orders." Veckrel looked around his bridge. His crew stared back at him, fear naked on their faces now. They were warriors, yes, trained from birth to fight and die for the collective. But they were not suicidal. They wanted to live, to see their families again, to have futures worth dying for. He thought about the 46 worlds the Zenthari had conquered, all those species who had fallen before collective might. Not one of them had possessed weapons like this. Not one of them had demonstrated this level of technological sophistication, combined with the absolute will to use it. The humans were different. They were not primitives to be conquered easily. They were equals, perhaps even superiors in ways that the collective had not anticipated, and Veckrel had led his fleet into their trap like a fool charging into darkness. "All ships," he broadcast across the fleet channel, "plot emergency retreat vectors. Full reverse thrust on my mark. We are leaving this system." He looked at Kane's image one last time. "We are withdrawing, human, but the collective will hear of this. They will know what you have done here." "I am counting on it," Kane replied. "Make sure you tell them everything, Commander. Make sure they understand that Protocol 13 was the merciful option. Make sure they know what will happen if anyone tries to invade human space again." The Zenthari fleet began its retreat slowly and painfully. Ships that had been advancing in perfect formation now scattered as each vessel fought independently against the gravitational currents trying to pull them toward the sun. Engines designed for combat. Maneuvers burned at emergency power levels. Their reactors pushed beyond safety margins in the desperate fight for survival. Sophie Martinez watched the tactical display as the enemy fleet turned back. Some ships were making good progress toward escape velocity, their powerful engines gradually overcoming the artificial gravity well. Others were struggling, barely holding position against the pull. And a few, those that had pushed too far into the trap before the retreat order came, were losing ground despite maximum thrust. "Admiral," she said quietly, 23 Zenthari ships are not going to make it. They are too deep in the gravity well." Kane's jaw tightened. He had known there would be casualties, had accepted it as the price of demonstrating Protocol 13's power. But knowing it intellectually and watching it happen were different things. Those 23 ships held thousands of living beings who were about to die horrible deaths, slowly pulled into the sun over the next several hours while their comrades fled to safety. "Continue monitoring," he ordered. "If any of them manage to break free, I want to know." But none of them did. Over the next 30 minutes, 23 Zenthari warships crossed the point of no return, their engines unable to overcome the gravitational forces dragging them sunward. Their distress signals echoed across the communication channels, pleas for help that nobody could answer. The rest of the fleet kept retreating, leaving their doomed comrades behind because there was nothing else they could do. Commander Veckrel sat in his command chair and listened to those distress calls. Each one felt like a knife in his chest. Those were his warriors, his responsibility. Dying because of his failure to take the humans seriously, he wanted to order the fleet to turn back, to attempt some impo. The Zenthari fleet limped toward the edge of the solar system like wounded animals retreating from a predator. Their formation was scattered and disorganized, Nothing like the disciplined military force that had entered human space with such confidence. Behind them, 23 ships continued falling toward the sun, their fate sealed and their crews beyond any hope of rescue. Admiral Kane stood on the bridge of the Defiant and watched the enemy withdraw. He felt no triumph, no satisfaction at the victory, just a bone-deep weariness and the knowledge that he had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Protocol 13 had worked exactly as designed, but the cost of that success would echo through human history forever. All ships maintain defensive positions, he ordered. I want eyes on that fleet until they clear Jupiter's orbit. If they turn back, we activate the gravitational network again. Captain Brooks approached him quietly. Admiral, we are receiving requests from the media, from government officials, from civilian authorities. Everyone wants to know what just happened. What should we tell them? Tell them the truth, Kane said. We defended Earth against an invasion force. We gave the enemy every opportunity to retreat peacefully. They refused, and we demonstrated the consequences of that refusal. Leave out the technical details of Protocol 13, but make sure everyone understands that we were prepared to do whatever was necessary to protect our home. And the 23 ships still falling toward the sun? Brooks asked. Do we mention them? Kane closed his eyes briefly. Yes, we mention them. We do not hide from what we have done. Those crews are dying because their commander ignored our warnings. That is a tragedy, but it is not our fault. We offered terms. They rejected them. Everything that happened after that is on Vikral's head, not ours. Lieutenant Sophie Martinez listened to this exchange from her tactical station. She understood the logic, agreed with it even, but it still felt wrong somehow. 23 ships full of living beings were falling into the sun, and humanity had built the trap that killed them. Yes, they had invaded human space. Yes, they had threatened Earth. But did that justify what was happening to them? She kept these thoughts to herself. This was not the time for philosophical debates about the morality of deterrence. That conversation would come later, probably in military academies and university classrooms for decades to come. Right now, her job was to monitor the enemy retreat and make sure no threats remained. On Earth, President Howard sat in her office and watched the news reports flooding in from every corner of the planet. The story of the Xanthari retreat was spreading like wildfire, each telling more dramatic than the last. Some called it humanity's greatest military victory, others called it a war crime. A few religious leaders were calling it divine intervention, proof that God protected humanity from its enemies. Howard knew it was none of those things. It was simply survival, the ugly practical reality of defending yourself against an enemy that wanted to destroy everything you loved. Protocol 13 was not glorious or heroic. It was necessary, which was somehow worse. General Carson entered her office carrying a tablet full of reports. Madam President, preliminary damage assessment shows 0 human casualties. All evacuation procedures worked as planned. The civilian population is already beginning to return to the inner planets. What about our fleet? Any damage from the gravitational effects? Minor structural stress on a few vessels, nothing critical. Admiral Kane is recommending a full inspection of every ship that was within the Protocol 13 activation zone, just to be safe. Howard nodded. And the international reaction? Mixed. Our allies are relieved and impressed. Our rivals are concerned about the power we demonstrated. Several nations are formally requesting detailed information about Protocol 13's capabilities and deployment. Tell them what we told the Xanthari, Howard said. It is a defensive system designed to protect Earth and human space. We will not use it offensively. We will not share the technology. And we strongly advise against anyone testing whether we are bluffing. Carson smiled slightly. That might start another Cold War, Madam President. Then we will handle that when it comes, Howard replied. Right now, I am more concerned about what happens when the Xanthari Collective receives Vekral's report. We just humiliated their military in front of the entire galaxy. That kind of embarrassment demands a response. What kind of response are you anticipating? Howard leaned back in her chair. Best case scenario. They decide we are too dangerous to fight and leave us alone. Middle case, they try diplomatic contact and we negotiate some kind of treaty. Worst case, they decide we are a threat that needs to be eliminated before we can use Protocol 13 against their home systems, and they come back with everything they have. Carson's expression grew serious. Can Protocol 13 handle a larger fleet? Unknown. We designed it to defend against the kind of force the Zenthari brought. If they show up with 1,000 ships instead of 300, the gravitational network might not be strong enough to trap them all. And if we tried to scale up the system, we risk destabilizing the sun itself, so we need to prepare for conventional warfare as a backup. Exactly, Howard said. Double the defense budget, accelerate our shipbuilding programs, and start recruiting for a major expansion of the fleet. If the Zenthari come back, I want enough firepower to make them regret it even without Protocol 13. Aboard the Zenthari flagship, Commander Veckrel sat alone in his quarters and worked on his report to the Collective Council. It was the hardest document he had ever written, each word a confession of failure and humiliation. He could not soften the truth or hide behind excuses. The facts spoke for themselves. The humans possess a weapon system beyond anything in our intelligence database, he wrote. They can manipulate gravitational forces on a stellar scale, turning their own star into a defensive mechanism. More importantly, they demonstrated complete willingness to use this weapon even though activation put their own planet at risk. These are not a species that bluffs or negotiates from weakness. When they issue a warning, they mean it. He paused and looked at the casualty reports from the 23 ships that had failed to escape. 3,247 warriors, all dead or dying, because he had been too arrogant to take human threats seriously. Their names would be added to his permanent record, a monument to his failure that he would carry for the rest of his life. I strongly recommend that the collective immediately cease all hostile actions toward humanity and open diplomatic channels. He continued writing. The humans have proven themselves to be technologically sophisticated and strategically capable. They would make powerful allies and extremely dangerous enemies. We have already seen what happens when we underestimate them. I advise against making that mistake again. Veckrel read over the report one last time, then transmitted it to the Collective Council. His career was finished. At best, he would be quietly retired to some administrative position where his failure could be forgotten. At worst, he would face formal charges for losing 30 ships in a botched invasion, but at least his remaining crew was alive. That had to count for something. 3 days later, the last evacuation transports returned to Earth. Sophie Martinez stood at the observation window and watched her home planet gradually fill with life again. Orbital stations powered back up, their lights twinkling like artificial stars. Ships moved between Earth and the Moon, resuming the trade and travel that had been interrupted by the crisis. On the surface, cities that had been partially evacuated welcomed their populations back. It almost looked normal, as if nothing had happened. But Sophie knew better. Everything had changed. Humanity had announced itself to the galaxy, not as explorers or traders, but as a species capable of turning stars into weapons. That knowledge would shape every interaction humanity had with alien civilizations from this day forward. Captain Brooks joined her at the window. Thinking about the future, Lieutenant? Sophie nodded. Do you think they will come back? The Zenthari or someone else? Eventually, Brooks said. There is always someone who thinks they are smarter or stronger than the last guy, someone who believes they can succeed where others failed. But they will come knowing what we are capable of now. They will come prepared or they will not come at all. Is that supposed to be comforting? No, Brooks replied honestly. It is supposed to be realistic. We won this battle, but the war for humanity's survival is just beginning. Protocol 13 bought us time and respect, but it also painted a target on our backs. Every aggressive species in the galaxy now knows we have technology worth stealing or destroying. So what do? We prepare, Brooks said simply. We build more ships, train more crews, and improve our defenses. We make alliances with other species who value peace. And we make absolutely certain that Protocol 13 is ready to activate at a moment's notice if we need it again. Sophie looked at her reflection in the window, superimposed over the image of Earth below. She looked older than she remembered, more tired, carrying weight that had not been there a week ago. She wondered if this was what it meant to be a defender of humanity, to carry the knowledge of terrible weapons and the responsibility to use them wisely. Admiral Kane thinks we should develop even more powerful versions of Protocol 13, she said, systems that can activate fast. 5 years passed. The story of how humanity turned back the Zenthari invasion spread across the galaxy like ripples from a stone dropped in still water. Every spacefaring civilization heard the tale, though the details changed with each telling. Some versions painted humans as peaceful defenders who reluctantly used their weapons. Other versions described humanity as dangerous warmongers who had built a doomsday device and were waiting for an excuse to use it. The truth, as usual, lay somewhere in between. Admiral Sophie Martinez, promoted twice in the years following the crisis, stood on the bridge of the defense ship Guardian and watched a Zenthari diplomatic vessel approach Earth. It still felt strange seeing their ships in human space without alarms blaring and weapons charging. The Zenthari Collective had sent their first diplomatic mission 3 months after the invasion failed, and slowly, carefully, the two species had begun building something that might eventually become trust. Captain Danny Foster, Sophie's second-in-command, approached with a data tablet. The Zenthari ambassador's ship will be docking at Station Unity in 40 minutes. President Howard will be conducting the formal greeting ceremony. We are supposed to maintain a visible but non-threatening presence during the proceedings. Sophie nodded. How is our guest feeling about all this? Nervous from what I hear. Apparently the ambassador is the cousin of Commander Vekral, the officer who led the original invasion. Family honor demands he try to repair the damage his relative caused. That must be awkward, Sophie observed. Foster shrugged. The Zenthari take honor seriously. Vekral was forced into retirement after the failed invasion, but his family is still trying to restore their reputation through diplomatic service. I guess we should appreciate the effort. Sophie thought about Commander Vekral wherever he was now. She wondered if he had nightmares about the 23 ships that fell into the sun. She wondered if he lay awake at night, thinking about the 3,000 warriors who died because he ignored a warning. She hoped he did. Not out of cruelty, but because someone needed to remember them. And she hoped it was the person responsible for their deaths. Protocol 13's gravitational nodes were still active throughout the solar system, maintained and upgraded regularly by teams of engineers who worked in shifts around the clock. The system could now be fully activated in 18 hours instead of 48, and improvements to the network allowed for more precise control of the gravitational currents. Several other star systems with human colonies had begun installing their own versions of the technology, creating a defensive network that covered most of human space. The galaxy had noticed. Trade vessels from a dozen different civilizations now made regular stops at human stations, their captains treating the defense forces with the kind of careful respect usually reserved for sleeping predators. Nobody wanted to test whether Protocol 13 was as devastating as the stories claimed. On Earth, President Howard, now in her second term, prepared for another round of diplomatic meetings with the Zenthari. She stood in her office reviewing briefing documents while her Chief of Staff, Angela Wells, ran through the schedule for the week. The Zenthari ambassador wants to discuss a mutual defense pact, Wells said. Apparently the collective is having problems with another aggressive species called the Krithani. They are hoping humanity might be willing to provide military support, or at least share some of our defensive technology. Howard looked up from her documents. They want us to give them Protocol 13? Not directly. They are asking for access to gravitational manipulation technology in general, framed as a trade agreement for their advanced shield systems. Absolutely not, Howard said flatly. Protocol 13 remains classified at the highest levels. We do not share it with allies, rivals, or anyone else. The moment the technology spreads, it stops being a deterrent and becomes just another weapon in an arms race. What about the Mutual Defense Pact that I am willing to consider, assuming the terms are favorable? If the Zenthari are facing an enemy that threatens their survival, helping them might prevent a refugee crisis or power vacuum that could destabilize this entire region of space. Wells made notes on her tablet. I will make sure our negotiators understand the boundaries. No technology sharing, but we are open to discussion about military cooperation. After Wells left, Howard walked to her office window and looked out at Washington. The city looked peaceful in the afternoon sunlight. People going about their lives without thinking about the vast political calculations being made to keep them safe. That was how it should be. Citizens should not have to worry about alien invasions or stellar-scale weapons. That was what governments were for, but Howard worried. She worried that humanity was becoming too dependent on Protocol 13, too confident in their ability to defend against any threat. She worried that some future crisis would require a response faster than 18 hours, or would come from a direction the gravitational network could not cover. She worried that humanity had announced itself to the galaxy, as a species capable of building doomsday weapons, and that reputation would attract exactly the kind of attention they wanted to avoid. Most of all, she worried about what would happen to humanity's soul if they ever had to use Protocol 13 at full destructive capacity. Turning back an invasion fleet was one thing. Actually destroying an enemy completely, burning thousands of ships and millions of beings because they threatened Earth, that was something else entirely. She did not know if humanity could commit that kind of mass killing and still consider themselves the good guys. In the Zenthari Collective's capital world, Commander Vekral sat in a small apartment overlooking the city and read the latest reports from the diplomatic mission to Earth. His forced retirement had been quiet and dignified on the surface, but everyone knew it was exile disguised as honorable discharge. He lived alone now, his family embarrassed by his failure, his former colleagues avoiding him like a disease. But he still followed the news from human space. He still read every analysis of Protocol 13, every speculation about humanity's military capabilities. He had become something of an expert on human psychology and strategy, mostly because he had nothing else to occupy his time. The report suggested the diplomatic mission was going well. His cousin, Ambassador Thekran, was making progress toward a mutual defense agreement. Trade between the collective and humanity was growing steadily. There was even talk of cultural exchange programs and joint scientific research. Vekral felt no satisfaction in this. He knew the truth that the diplomats and politicians were carefully avoiding. Humanity had not become the collective's ally out of friendship or shared values. They had become allies because the Zenthari were terrified of them. Every negotiation, every treaty, every friendly gesture was built on a foundation of fear. The collective now treated humanity as equals, not because they respected human culture or admired human achievements, but because they were afraid of what would happen if they made humanity into an enemy. That was the real legacy of his failed invasion. He had not just lost ships and warriors. He had fundamentally changed how the galaxy viewed humanity. Before his attack, humans were seen as newcomers, interesting but ultimately unimportant. After his retreat, they were seen as dangerous, possessing technology and willingness that made them threats to be managed carefully. Vekral wondered if Admiral Kane understood what he had done. By demonstrating Protocol 13, Kane had protected Earth but also ensured that humanity would forever be viewed with suspicion and fear. No species in the galaxy would ever fully trust them. No alliance would ever be completely genuine. Humanity had bought its safety with its reputation, trading the possibility of true friendship for the certainty of deterrence. It was a bargain Vekral understood all too well. It was the same bargain the Zenthari Collective had made for centuries, using military might to create a peace built on fear rather than mutual respect. Now humanity had learned the same lesson. Power brought safety, but it also brought isolation. Back on the Guardian, Sophie received a message that Admiral Jake Kane wanted to see her. She made her way to his office, wondering what the legendary commander wanted. Kane had officially retired 2 years ago, but he still maintained an office at the defense headquarters and still advised on major strategic decisions. She found him standing at his window, looking out at Earth. He looked older than she remembered, his hair completely white now and his face lined with age and worry. "Admiral Martinez," Kane greeted her formally. "Thank you for coming." "Of course, sir. What can I do for you?" Kane turned from the window. "I wanted to talk to you about the future. My future specifically. I am stepping down from my advisory role, completely retiring this time." Sophie felt surprised. "Sir, the Defense Force still needs your expertise. The Defense Force needs fresh thinking, not an old man who made one correct decision 5 years ago," Kane replied. "I have been reviewing the strategic situation and I realize I am becoming a problem. Every time someone suggests a new approach or questions Protocol 13's role in our defense strategy, I shut them down because I built that system and I cannot be objective about it. I do not understand." Kane sighed. "Sophie, Protocol 13 saved Earth. That is an objective fact. But it is also becoming a crutch, something we rely on